So welcome. This is inCitu's sixth webinar, believe it or not. We started these, about 8 months ago to start to build a community around immersive media and urbanism placemaking, and to build a knowledge base around the folks that are using immersive media to improve the conversations that we have around the future in cities. So inCitu, if you don't know already, is a startup that is on a mission to democratize urban planning through using on-site location-based augmented reality. We have a platform called inCitu AR where you can do location-based augmented reality specifically designed to be barrier-free for community engagement and stakeholder communication. And so we do these webinars, like I said, to bring the community together. And I'm really happy today to welcome Kieran Far from a sibling platform of our, called 3DStreet that is also on a similar mission. So I'm going to introduce
Thank you, Nick.
Kieran. Thanks for being here. So Kieran Far is the founder of 3DStreet. He started his career in video streaming and 3D software development, went on to leadership roles at video streaming companies like Vimeo, Bitmovin, and Brightcove. And in the past decade, he's become very active in transportation and environmental advocacy in your home, San Francisco, right? So you've worked with organizations like Safer 17th and the Sierra Club to bring about positive changes in local communities. This is part of the work that led Kieran to develop 3DStreet and to productize these learnings to help planners and advocates more effectively. Whoops, sorry, 1 second. We are on the same mission because inCitu is also trying to be accessible to both planners and amateurs. And so I'm just going to zoom ahead to the agenda. Today, we're going to talk about 3DStreet a little bit, and then we really have these three key takeaways when we're talking about using 3D and AR for street design advocacy. Number one, AR is a feedback loop for urban design. Number two, converting AR prototypes for using them for outreach and comms. And number three is the message that anyone can do this, whether you're a professional or an amateur. So keep those in mind as we launch into the conversation. And I'll give it away to Kieran to tell you about 3DStreet.
Awesome. Before I jump into 3DStreet, I just want to also sing the praises of Nick. So Nick and I got to know each other many years ago through the Street Mix Discord. And so we found in each other both this interest in the intersection of this world of spatial and augmented reality and civil engineering and making the world around us a better place by using these technologies. So it makes me happy to be here as a guest, and it also makes me happy, Nick, that you are continuing your leadership in this area, and it's fun. Like, it really is this.
It actually, I think, started in the New Urbanist memes group on Facebook.
Oh, yes, even earlier.
StreetMix founder was in, which StreetMix is a 2D tool much like this, and then they were starting Minecraft servers at the time, and I think there was a spirit back then of this courage of like, hey, we can role play the future that we want to see. Totally. And that started to actually produce both people who became professional planners and also folks like Kieran building these tools that are, kind of bringing some game design aspects to urban planning. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, at a high level, 3DStreet is a tool for planners, educators, and advocates to be able to create the future, specifically of their streets and shared spaces. So we try to make it really easy for folks to drag and drop common street configurations, and models and placemaking objects so that they can describe their vision in a way that stakeholders will be excited about and then approve their projects, whether it's funding or political approval or legal approval to move forward. And so, Nick and I thought it may be helpful to kind of talk a little bit more high level about what are the problems that we're seeing in the market that everyone has, and then how do we use these tools in order to address these problems. So on the next slide, and this is not necessarily a new statement for some of you, but for some of you, maybe it's the right way to think about this, is that at the core of what we do is that we're trying to bring communities and stakeholders along for the ride of the vision that we have for safer streets. But one of the biggest challenges is that it's really, really difficult for most people to imagine that the built environment changes. And therefore, it is really tough to be able to even talk about what these changes could be at a level playing field. So on the next slide, why does this matter? So the impact of this, and what we see time and again, is that because there's this information asymmetry between the community and professionals and engineers, it leads to projects that do not have political support. They're pushed back, they're watered down, they're delayed, or they're canceled. And at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to improve. How can we do a better job of using these newer tools and working with our communities so that we can get these projects done and make the world a better place? On the next slide, what you'll see is a very reductionist version of the kind of typical street improvement project timeline. And what we're trying to convey here is that it's very often kind of top-down led, so from an agency or from an elected official saying, here's the project with a capital P, and then often viewing community outreach and engagement as required, but a source of project liability, because that's the point at which things may go off the rails. The opponents of the project may come out of the woodwork and delay, cancel, etc. And so what we're trying to do is to imagine, well, how could this be different? And then on the next slide, what we're basically trying to say is, what if we could get these projects done faster? What would that look like? And one way to think about this is that we are working together with the community in order to empower them to help come up with what are the projects we should be doing. And looking at this project development lifecycle as a partnership with the community. And this is all kind of sounds cool in theory, and we have tried this many times in our projects, but there's one key issue that has prevented this from being effective. And on the next slide, we call it out. And then basically the problem is that, again, spatial communication is extremely difficult. And often what we'll see is professional engineers using striping drawings or two-dimensional plan drawings, and then describing from those what those changes are. And you can see it in people's eyes as a small business owner, as a resident, that very often those things don't connect. And what we're trying to do here with these tools, and the whole purpose of our presentation today, is how can we level that playing field? How can we make it so that as a community member that doesn't have background in these things and is busy with so many other things in life, that they can engage at an equal level as other folks in their community and the professionals that we work with. Did I deliver that correctly, Nick? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think when we talk about case studies, it might become more clear, but this really reminds me of what happened with so-called tactical urbanism in the 2010s. If you remember, like the street plans, and Mike Lydon has released books on this, but folks started to use cheap materials to prototype street designs. And so it accelerated the projects and also gave people a chance to try something out before the committing. And I think what some of these digital tools might unlock is even further accelerating that ability to sort of be iterative. And so when we talk about key takeaway number one, it's really sort of amplifying what people are already doing with sort of cheap materials, street painting, but you can even do that to a greater degree using digital tools before you even get out there and purchase stuff. So.
Yeah. And that's a good introduction into these key takeaways. So what are we trying to teach you all in this webinar? And there really are kind of three key points here. So like Nick mentioned, we want to introduce the concept of using augmented reality as a prototyping feedback loop, and not just looking at augmented reality as a way to display things that are finished, but to actually help the project development and prototyping process. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the more traditional use case for AR, which is to show what the finished project could look like. And then what we'll do at the end is actually go through and show you step by step how you can use these processes in your own work. So I'll jump into AR as a feedback loop. Let's go back to the last slide real quick. And what I want to convey here is that, in the old days, let's say, we would draw something, we would use a tool like AutoCAD, and then we would visualize it. And what is challenging about that workflow is that the time for that feedback is very delayed. So there's a lot of labor put into that design, there's a lot of effort in that visualization, and then we can get the feedback from stakeholders and community. what we're trying to convey, that it's finally possible, the technology is finally here, is that now we can use these tools for rapid iteration of potential prototypes at the earliest stages of a project. And that's what we've been actually seeing community advocates doing with these tools. And in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is to kind of use these rapid response concepts, but in an augmented reality way, and then test it out to see if it works. So we'll show you some examples. This is an awesome project called the Hayes Promenade here in San Francisco. Andrew Seigner is an advocate who's been working tirelessly to improve his neighborhood. And this is a pretty progressive proposal even for San Francisco, where the recommendation is that on this two-lane road with lots of retail and parking, to suggest to remove this, to go down to one single direction lane, and then to remove some of the parking to have much more space for a pedestrianized area. So the context here is that they're trying to come up with proposals that are truly feasible. So it's one thing, like in the previous picture, to come up with an augmented or artificial intelligence view of, beautiful flowers and what it looks like. But the challenge here is, can we make something that's feasible and have the community and especially business owners feel comfortable that the proposal can be done, that the world won't end, and that they can get their deliveries and that they can get their cars through to do what they need to do as a business owner, but that the project can still succeed. So let's go to the next slide where we show kind of a top-down view of the current conditions. So we're looking at Hayes Street, that's kind of east and west street. You can see that there's parking on both sides. There's one or two parklets that are there already. There is an existing plaza there. Kind of see it in the lower left or the southwest corner of this picture. And so the intent is that that kind of block that's square in the middle could be something that could be at least partially, if not fully, pedestrianized. So what were the steps that Andrew took in this? On the next slide, you'll see one of the proposals for potential configuration. And in the world of prototyping, we're always sure to use words such as, this is an alternative, this could be something we make, but it's not intended to say this is exactly what is going to happen. These are purposefully experiments. And when Andrew works with the stakeholders, those are the words he's using. And that's part of, advocacy. Effective advocacy is not scaring people too much by saying, we're definitely going to do this, but saying, we're exploring this. This is an option. And dear community member, I'd like to work with you to see if this is feasible and if it would benefit your business or your organization or your neighborhood, or your home values, as a lot of local residents will come back to. So this was a great start. It helps him understand, kind of what looks good from a satellite perspective. So we're using 3DStreet's ability to combine map layers with our user customizable elements so that they can create their custom configuration. That's a great start. But we took it one step further, Andrew did, and what he did is actually converted this into an augmented reality scene. And the word that I like to use a lot is feasibility. And what you're going to see here is that it's not beautiful, right? This is not going to win an award for, the best rendering engine ever. The point of this is to be representative about the use of space and to be able to make those changes as rapidly as possible so that we can iterate on a solution that actually works. As Andrew's walking through the scene, we see a couple key elements here, and he's going pretty fast. One of them at the beginning is emergency vehicle access. It's a crucial stakeholder for these sorts of projects. Can the fire truck fit? Can there be enough clearance if they're going over the safe hit posts for the new configuration? The next thing that's crucial for this project is support from the businesses. And there we look at concepts such as access, so access to existing garages, access for loading or unloading. And then we look at the number of new tables or seats that these businesses could have. And most of them here are restaurants and bars. So there's a lot of positive benefits that the businesses can have, but they need to be able to see that it's possible. So this has been a crucial step for him to be able to get those businesses and organizations on board to say, okay, it's possible. And that moves along to the next step where instead of having folks that maybe are on the fence or even objectionists saying this is not going to be possible, we can at least say, okay, I can imagine a world where we could convert this and that I could still get the things that I need done for my business. So just as a quick summary, the process was create one example of a design, export that, go on site, record the video, and then use that asset in the discussions with local businesses, or actually showing the augmented reality scene live there with community stakeholders.
Yeah, and just to illustrate like how quick it is, I was out yesterday morning with a model from 3DStreet that I brought into inCitu. I live in Queens, on Queens Boulevard, which actually had some recent street transformations with a bike lane and separated by a new parking lane, and then they've been calming this for a little while. But I took a quick model from 3DStreet into Queens Boulevard and was able to go out, and we could talk a little bit about, like Kieran said, it's not perfect, and this model actually was not designed for Queens Boulevard, so it's not really applicable. But even just using this random model, I was able to get a couple quick insights. One, like there is maybe even more room for expanding sidewalk space on Queens Boulevard. I was also using like the street lights that were existing street lights to scale it. Another thing is that you notice occlusion, in other words, cutting out real people and my body from the 3D model can be a useful tool for like exploring how real people interact, and also sort of like communicating in this way. Like you can see real cyclists and stuff coming through there. So I guess like to emphasize what Kieran was saying, do you think that like just doing this as early as possible, even before you have a rough idea, can be valuable? And like, what does this loop sort of look like as you start to sort of refine your ideas? How does the refinement actually happen?
Yeah, good question. So I like this example a lot. To your point, it was very rapid, and that's what I enjoy, is being able to quickly come up with this idea, put pen to paper, to use the old analogy, and then see if it works. And something that I see very viscerally in this picture is there is room to extend the sidewalk. Like that is feasible. It could happen. And then you can start to imagine what other possibilities that opens up. So then, to think about this as a feedback loop, you would go back and say, okay, well, here's the extent that we could extend the sidewalk. Here might be the extent to which we could add an additional protected or buffered bike facility. But then there's also, here's the limit. Like, if we do have X lanes of through traffic for automobiles, then we are limited by some degree. And so you could go back right now or in a little bit, edit that example model, make it more specific to that environment, come back and do another cut at that visualization. And that's kind of what I mean by this feedback loop, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work in the actual location, coming back, modifying the design or proposal to accommodate that. And it's only been made possible very recently by these tools that allow you to very quickly create that concept, publish it to AR, and rinse and repeat.
Awesome. So moving on, if we've done a good iterative cycle with community input, and we arrive at a plan that we want to then share more broadly. Number two, key takeaway is about leveraging the AR for communications and for public engagement. And so the AR design that you land on then would become communications and outreach material. And so we have a couple case studies to talk about this idea, but is there anything else you wanted to say about
No, this is exactly right. The only thing I will add is that as you're creating these prototypes, even though they're low fidelity, what we're also seeing is that those prototypes can then be the foundation for detailed design. So whether it's 3DStreet or another platform, you can export those rough prototypes and then use those in your detailed design application of choice, such as AutoCAD. And then that really accelerates the process of saying, okay, what's our intent here? What is the community okay with? What is feasible? So that the civil engineer or whoever is doing striping can come up with a very feasible detailed design very quickly by leveraging that existing asset.
And so I can show some projects that inCitu's done with, engineers and actual clients that had more finished designs. And so one example is from Buffalo, New York, where they're working on a pedestrian bridge concept to connect the park to an underserved neighborhood. And so the idea that it was not just about, connecting pedestrians, but the fact that this neighborhood, doesn't have park access, the highways, splitting the neighborhood from access to a park. And so telling the story, not just of this architecture of the bridge, but also the story of this neighborhood regaining access to amenities that had been cut off, can be shown in this way in a first-person perspective. And so we got the model, and our 3D engineer, Christian, modeled it. And you can see that this project actually was completed in 2024. So we get to see the before and after of one of these, which it's still, AR is still pretty new in this use case. So getting to see like a project that's actually been completed this is one example that you can check out. And we'll talk more about like the engagement strategies we used. But as you can see, like we're not using MetaQuest or other headsets or goggles. Like we're really focused on just the lowest common sort of AR platforms like mobile and tablet, because it's the most accessible for folks. But even more importantly, you can actually look at it as a group versus as individual. And so we'll get back to it later, but looking at things as groups is a pretty key part of this type of engagement and communication. But you can work it into a campaign based on events and also based on social media, leveraging the recordings and videos that Kieran will explain more later. Another example of transit project that we worked on with Central Ohio Transit Authority was for a bus rapid transit corridor project, part of the Link US plan in the Columbus area. And so we were visualizing not just the transit infrastructure, the new bus stations that would be taking the middle two lanes of a large street, but also like the type of growth that might be encouraged by building the transit. So I think the point with this campaign, which was, very professional, there was a PR firm working with Central Ohio Transit Authority that worked with us to integrate the AR into a broader campaign. And they, had the strategy where they didn't want to just show the bus stations. They wanted to show this is where you might have a walkable neighborhood if you invest in this plan. So it's sort of like the broader thing. And then Kieran's tool 3DStreet, also has the capability to do more than just street design. So if we're talking about placemaking or parks, that's something else that you could bring in to really add more context to the actual street proposal. All right. So maybe you could share about this project in Valencia Street.
Totally. Yeah, and I just dropped a link into the chat. This has become kind of an infamous project in San Francisco. Valencia Street is another, high-intensity commercial corridor, lots of bars and restaurants. And what this video is showing is an example of how we could show different street configurations, and very specifically, they're changing from a center running bicycle facility to a curbside bicycle facility. And one of the biggest confusion points for a lot of community members is, how are we going to be able to deal with parklets? Where will this stuff go? And what does that look like? And so this was one of a few different ways for folks to be able to understand what are those changes that are going to happen, and how will that affect both the users of the street and the businesses that are on the curbside. So if we go to the next slide, what I wanted to do is show a little bit more about how this was made, because this is something that you can do within a few minutes to be able to create something very similar. And then we can talk about different techniques that you can use in order to make this compelling content that's going to help move your project forward. So this is a view of what we had just seen in augmented reality, but from a little bit elevated perspective inside of 3DStreet, where you have the target redesign placed in context in the actual location where it's proposed. So if we go to the next slide, here are the basic steps. So we're going to go deep here. The basic steps are, we want to actually create a scene. We're choosing a location. We put in the street. We make changes to modify for current conditions. And then very importantly, we have a new feature that is made for partners like inCitu, that you can export the scene as an AR-ready model. Then inside of inCitu, you import that, you localize that into the proper location, you go to the field for fine-tuned placements, and then you can create those visuals that you'll need for storytelling, either for on-demand or live with groups like Nick was talking about for community building and engagement.
So we wanted to jump and actually get a look at 3DStreet. So I want to give my screen share over to Kieran to show you a little bit about how it works. And in the meantime, if folks have any questions, we will have some time later for them. So if you want to type them into the chat now, we'll check back at that with them later. But in the meantime, looks like Kieran's got the tool up. So let's learn how to build a street section in 3DStreet.
Yeah, so this will be really quick. I've logged in. I'm going to create a blank scene. I like to start with a location. And in this example, we were doing 16th and Valencia in San Francisco. So we'll click on that. We'll click Update Scene Location. And what that will do is set the center point of our scene at that longitude and latitude. It then brings in the 3D tiles from the latest satellite view that it has from that perspective. I live here, so I already understand what the orientation, but if not, you can scroll around and look what is the ideal placement. And then the next thing you can do is actually just add a street layer. So at the bottom there's add a layer. We'll just drag and drop a very basic example. There's a couple different template streets here. Once I've dragged that there, we can use our tools like move and rotate to align that both in the correct orientation or direction and then the correct placement. So that's very rapid. I went through that super quickly, but you get the sense that you can do that for whatever project you'd like to get a very basic starting point. Think of this as existing conditions. And let's say we want to add a bike lane. So we'd duplicate one of those existing lanes. We could change this into a bike lane, change the width perhaps. This will not win any Safe Street Design Awards, but the point is to show we can do this very quickly, and it's not meant to be perfect. The goal is that we get something it's usable enough such that we can then go to the field, see if it's feasible, and then rinse and repeat. So we've done something basic. It's good enough for our test. We'll then click the Share button, and then we'll download this as what's called an AR-ready GLB file. And what this does is it does a couple extra preparations so that those models are ready to be viewed in a third-party augmented reality app like inCitu. So I'll press that button, and it'll take a second. Now we've just downloaded that GLB file. I'll pause my screen share so then we can see what does that look like from the inCitu application. We'll then take that GLB file and then place that in the location.
Great. So yeah, once you've got your GLB file from 3DStreet, you can upload it to inCitu AR, and Zeev or someone, if you want to put the link in the chat to where you can sign up for a free plan on inCitu and try out one of these projects yourself. Basically, it's a 4-step process that we've built with inCitu AR. So you upload the 3D model. You will then have a 3D map where you can place the model and use this orange gizmo to align it as close as you can to the spot where you want it to be on the street. And then step 3 is you will fill in some details for what it will look like when people scan in. So inCitu is an appless platform, so when the end user and the viewer are able to access the AR with a QR code that goes to an app clip or an instant app, so they don't have to download and register for an account, because we're trying to be as friendly for community engagement as possible. So when you have your project, it'll be linked to this QR code forever. And then as you're doing the iterative design process, you can then go back to edit the project, and at step 1, swap your model out for the next draft, and it'll still be linked to the same QR code. So if you're printing pamphlets or flyers for an event, those will still work, or street decals, which we often do. Now, once you've got your project published, you can access the AR in 3 different ways. One is, of course, on-site, the way that we've been showing. That's geolocated. And then the second way is if you're not at the site location of the project, you can see a remote view. And this could also be good for some events on streets that are busy. We have a disclaimer when the AR comes up, please be aware of your surroundings, and definitely don't have people running out into busy streets. So if you do want to explore the scene up close, in the project we did in Ohio, we actually swapped. We have a toggle to interactive mode, and then you can drag the model back over to like the side of the road where you can explore it safely and see all the details. The third way is we have web maps that you can embed on websites as well to read about the project and see the 3D model in the web. And then the next step actually happens out on the street. And so one of the things that inCitu does is that you can go out on the street and use the edit mode to fine tune the position of the model and then save that offset for all the viewers. And so if your model isn't lined up with the georeference they are on the first try, you can actually make adjustments to fine tune it so that it looks the right way from the viewpoint that you're intending. And then we're going to talk about, once you've got it lined up on the site, Kieran could tell you like how to like capture videos and content that you're going to then be able to use at meetings or stuff like that.
So this is the step that, hey, we have something we'd like to share. And what I have been learning is that there's another art to master, which is how do you then create compelling content from that? And I'll share a couple of the tips that from the work that I've been doing, but there's definitely more to explore here. And I would say that this is a category that's very interesting in its multidisciplinary nature of combining video production skills, communication skills, civil engineering skills, augmented reality
design
skills. Exactly. And it all kind of comes together. And so what we're seeing in this example is a couple very purposeful decisions where the placement of the model is purposefully offset from the actual location where it will start. And we did this because it was confusing to people if we only show the proposed conditions and you can't see the existing conditions. Another thing that we did was to elevate the placement of labels. So inside of the 3DStreet app, you can modify the location of the labels that show measurements and the type of use for each lane. And then you'll also notice it's casual but pretty effective to actually be doing the movements or motions that someone in the situation would actually be doing. And in this example, it's walking across the crosswalk with a light, so it's relatively safe, but it's also showing the multidimensionality of it. If we go to the next slide, what you'll see is a not as compelling example. So we'll look at video style number 2.
Oops.
And there you can kind of see a little bit of the challenge of this, where this is stationary, I'm not walking, and this one I actually set the model flush so that you see the new conditions, but you can't see the existing conditions, right? And so this is a lot of that experimentation that you'll do in the field, and it really is dependent upon the project, the stakeholders that you're working with, and the feasibility constraints of the existing built environment.
And to be clear, Kieran, this is for the use case of using video content produced from AR. And That's so if you are on site for live events, like you can see the existing conditions, obviously look outside of
your phone
exactly.
Screen. You just
Hopefully
look at
you will
it.
as you walk across the street. So that's the live. I think we'll talk about it more, but we also have a guide based on what we've learned from doing engagement campaigns and like how the live event and the live experience plays off and helps to create the recorded content that then helps to spread the word broadly. It's sort of like an art to that as well.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think I talk a lot about creating an asset for digital sharing, but there's definitely this magic that happens when you have these activations and you empower people to be able to see it.
Yeah, so we released a guide recently called AR for Public Engagement, and it's a handbook that you can download from our website. Zeke just posted it in the chat. These are some of the things we've learned from doing real projects using AR in a way that folks will actually engage with it and use it to its fullest effect. And one of the ways to do that is don't make it a solitary experience. Like figure out how groups can view this together, because it's like if you think about this technology, it's not about the visualization, it's about the conversations that it unlocks. And so it's as conversation tech, it's meant to be used by groups. And so we love AR. We know that it's not the only reason that people will show up. And so to be able to get a group together, go where the people are and think about what community events you could integrate it into that would bring a diverse group of people. Because one of the other features of this type of tool, I think, is that it brings together the type of people that are hard to gather together into a group. And so you have a more diverse group of stakeholders than even you might get at a civic meeting in a gymnasium at 9 p.m. And so maybe the farmers market has that group of people. The ability to be portable and take these proposals to those groups in the community, meet them where they are, is like key. And then the second thing is that you can mix the AR with other mediums and tools. And so Kieran's already showed how 3D maps on the web can be really useful for giving that spatial context. But also like the types of events the AR is a part of. In Columbus, when we did the project, it was embedded into a bus tour. And so the city was actually taking people out on a real bus, not the BRT bus because they haven't ordered them yet, but the normal city bus driving on this new proposed route, sort of a trip into the future. So it was an actual experience where the AR was used to then show the proposals as we got off in each stop. I thought that was very clever. Another very clever thing that folks in Columbus did was to use the feature of cutting out people in front of the 3D model to actually take sort of selfies. And the mayor, of course, figured out how to do this to take a photo op in front of a bus station that wasn't built yet. And so this is very important, I think, because architectural renderings usually show stock people that maybe just aren't people that you recognize as even looking like the people that are in your neighborhood. But if you can see someone that you actually know talking to you, telling you a story on social media, that's where I think this tech could start to come in for like those local influencer types on social media. So what should we talk about next? Do you have any? I got some questions for Kieran. If any folks have other questions about practice, or I know there's folks like Mark in the chat that have actual experience doing this and might have some tips of their own to share too. So that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think the only other main point that we were going to put across is that this is for more than just street design. And so one of the trends that I'm seeing for 3DStreet's user base is an increase in folks that are doing plaza designs or working with economic development agencies specifically for activation. So how can they tell the story about at a metro station or the BRT station or a bus stop that it's more than just transportation, but it's around community vibrancy? How can we actually show the positive economic development that we can drive with transit adoption? And that's been fun. You know, it's actually a really engaging thing. It lends itself nicely to doing these sorts of groups visualizations.
So I've got a question. It's a very easy to use tool for amateurs as well, which is a key topic because advocates can use it as well as professionals. And so we know that here in New York, there's projects like McGinnis Boulevard, had a project that was in the works to do bike lanes and some Vision Zero stuff, but it got sort of held up and half implemented. And so then the community group was like, we want more. You didn't do everything we wanted. So they're able to say exactly what, needs to be added. But when you're using this tool as an amateur, even as a planning or EDC staff that hasn't used CAD before, like one of the biggest hurdles is, of course, like being able to create 3D content. So have you run into this with 3DStreet, and how do you help your users kind of like have the 3D content they need to be able to get started to create stuff like this?
Yeah, the number one tool that we found is really helpful is to have a library of very common objects that are useful for demonstrating these stories. And so actually on the next slide, or maybe 2 slides ahead, you see some of the examples of some of the more recent objects. And this is directly from user feedback. So, we hear what people are trying to do. We see the projects they're creating. And then we're very responsive to say, okay, how can we empower everyone to be able to do that? And so some of the more recent additions that we've been working on are literally placemaking objects. So farmers market stalls, food trucks, outdoor seating, and then trees, foliage, all these sorts of things. And again, what that all contributes to is rapid prototyping. So it doesn't need to be perfect, but good enough that we can represent, here's the intent of how we could use our space differently. And for us, at least, we're seeing these are really popular. Like, it's more than just designing a street. It's about creating the community. So I'm very excited about like what else does the community want? What are other things that we can work with our users and folks on this webinar to create those stories that are compelling and will actually move these projects forward.
Yeah, we've been experimenting with like easy 3D, how to make 3D for rapid prototyping too. And like a couple of the emerging methods we've experimented with are photogrammetry, so scanning physical objects, which is really accessible, and even like workshops with kids that they do for design charrettes. This could be really valuable to just use a phone app to scan a physical model into 3D, draw something up with paper, cardboard, or Legos or clay, and then get it out on the street really quickly. I love this method. And then another method that's emerging, of course, is artificial intelligence and being able to do text to 3D or 2D image to 3D prompts. And so you can get sort of plausible buildings out of these, and then other objects that might be useful. And do
Totally.
you have any features like this in 3DStreet?
It's not directly in the app yet, but I just actually posted a blog post there. You can totally use these platforms, like Trellis is one, to create any arbitrary 3D model you want and then import those into your scenes. And those really open the door for creativity because they can be real things like a building, but they can also be fantastical. So like my son likes Cars, the movie Cars. And so having some sort of character that he recognizes, it immediately draws him in. So there's so much potential there that is early. Like
We did a fundraiser for a local park project, and they had people gathered for a dinner party, and some of them had brought kids, and so we had tables in the back with Duplo blocks, and people were building ideas for the park with them. Very, basic things, but some of them actually were very interesting. There was someone that from the Dragon Boat Races Club, and so they built a dragon boat, and that opened the conversation of what if we got the Dragon Boat Club involved in the park. So it's sort of like it's a great chaperone for new ideas, I think, and to come in from all sorts of folks. So maybe now that we've got to the end of the presentation, we can review our key takeaways and then open it up for questions.
Cool. So takeaways. A new one that we're trying to introduce is that we can now use AR as a feedback loop. So we don't have to have everything finished and beautiful. The very purpose of it can be for rapid prototyping. Number two is that we can then use those prototypes as the outreach material. And so whether it's something that's fully finished or even just enough to convey what the intent is, and it makes me very excited to hear all of the work that Nick has done in terms of the group activities on site, like it's excellent. And then the third point, which is really the underlying message, is that everyone on this call who's a member of this webinar can do this. It is within your power and capabilities. And if you experience challenges, we are here to make it easier. And that's the literal vision and goal of our organizations, is to make these things accessible to all ages and abilities.
Yes, and 3DStreet has a Discord channel, which is great. inCitu has a Slack user group, and possibly soon a LinkedIn user group where we exchange projects with each other. So, we hope to see you involved in the community. And if you want to get more tips or even submit your own, we have this handbook available from our website. This is a code where you can also download it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. This was our first sort of attempt at something like this, and I think it can grow in the future with everyone's knowledge combined. So I'd love to keep that going. Questions, anyone? There's a comment that the placemaking exercise is really awesome for complete streets community engagement.
Yes, this is Wen Hao, and this is awesome. Thank you both for demonstrating the tool. I feel like in recent years, the web rendering and AR technologies has opened up so many doors. And I had that comment because I knew in Oakland, California, downtown, there's like a complete street community engagement session, and I think on one of that street festival that they basically closed the streets, and then they put up visuals using 3D streets, and put demo like different street concept. I think it was like using a combination of street mix and 3D street. That really gave the residents and community members an idea of how the proposed vision would look like and different alternatives, and have them like voting on different things. So with even some tools like you demonstrated today with inCitu, I think that would be awesome to even make that more playful, because I think playful urbanism is also something that I personally really like having them to play and interact with the elements will be super fun. Just speaking from that.
I love that. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, totally.
Thanks, Wen
Hao. These shared the link to our survey again. If you don't have a question and you want to fill out the survey, that would be so helpful for us. It takes just 2 minutes. Let's see. I had another question on my list, but I'm trying to figure out which one. One thing that we didn't talk about, I guess, Kieran, that we were mentioning before was the idea of like, why can't the data just do stand on its own. Like we have a lot of plans that are very detailed, and we're trying to be data driven and efficient, but why does it take something like this that it's playful or more of a story to actually get the ball rolling?
Yeah, it's something that I'm sure many of you on this call have experienced as well, that when you're engaging with community members, data kind of rolls off of them like oil and water. It's like, okay, you can tell me about these things, but very often the response is emotional. So you can tell me that street safety is important, but I may feel the loss emotionally of my parking space, and that's going to override anything that you could show me in terms of data. And what we have found to be very effective is to think about the positive alternative uses of the space, and that is a story. So, turning that back on itself, it's, hey, you may be losing a parking space, but here's what you gain. Or even better, what would you like to gain? What benefit do you want to see? And being able to turn that fear of loss into an interactive, collaboration opportunity, it truly works. Like that's when people's minds change and they think, oh, I have agency to decide what could be there. And yeah, I like my parking space, but having 5 more tables would make me more money. Or having these beneficial rain gardens actually prevents the chance or reduces the chance of flooding. So I would like that. And I think that's the potential of this. Like, how can we think positively about what could be as opposed to always going back to, loss aversion as the initial response?
There's another aspect of this that I think comes in with the digital tools specifically, which is that any project that is done once on any of these platforms is now available to sort of reuse and recycle in other places. And I think we have some ideas like complete streets, or now with housing, there's lots of new ideas like single stair housing and which types of housing we need to legalize again to solve the housing crisis. These new ideas that need sort of advocates are trying to spread everywhere. The digital tool kind of enables you to benefit from the work that's already been done and reuse literally sometimes the 3D models for a new place or a new site, which that personally excites me a lot. And I'm very curious if there's any advocates in the audience, like how that could become an engine for having people take these videos to planning meetings and start to craft legislature, craft policy, actually.
I think what I love about the presentation you guys have shown in this tool is just that you've made it really accessible to community members, and I think that that's something that has always been a barrier in architecture. And sometimes when other people aren't able to engage in design, you sort of end up with these buildings that aren't as engaging and don't really capture the imagination of the public. So I love its potential to do that, and I like that you provided very like clear examples of how to incorporate it. I think sometimes in architecture with new technology, it's like just not always clear to architects, or maybe it's just because the industry is so kind of baked in specific ways of doing things. So yeah, I think it's all really exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very interesting. One of the things that excites me the most about some of this stuff, Kieran, is like, do you find this as well, that it's kind of unlocking some of the old fashioned technology? Because like even the ability to use like physical models again, but at this time to bring them into 3D, I think that's really cool because like we can benefit from a lot of like old school, like in Switzerland, they use these poles at the construction sites to show how high the building's going to be, sort of like old fashioned augmented reality.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes. And I think one of the ways this comes out is that what we're finding is that the fidelity of these models is less important than what they represent. And I think you mentioned this before, Nick. The most important thing is that it starts the conversation and allows people to have agency, that they can decide how these things are moved around. And, whether it's a stick, a cone, or a pole, it's what it represents that's the critical element.
Absolutely. And actually, like the lower fidelity ones might actually be better sometimes if you're trying to get engagement. And I wonder if Mark, if you've seen this as well, but like I notice when we do something that looks really nice, people, first of all, they don't even know sometimes what's AR and what's real, so it's hard to distinguish. And second, it's kind of intimidating. It's like, I don't really know what I could add to that because it's so beautiful. And so maybe paper and sketch aesthetic would be good art design for some stages of this process.
100%. And this is worth praising and calling out Professor Mark Schlossberg. He's in the chat. He was actually kind of early on this a year ago, pulling me and what we're doing into this field of augmented reality. And the question of fidelity is a big question, because what you're getting at is, what is the right level of fidelity to show what could be, but to keep the door open for change? And to your point, we are definitely seeing that when you have something that is almost too perfect, people are scared to say, I want to change it, because they also don't feel as though they're capable of doing that. Whereas when you start to reduce back to basic building blocks, primary colors, simplified low poly images, then there's a feeling of agency, because there's less of that intimidation of, oh, I don't know if I could actually modify that. And I would say this is an open question. Like, I think there could be a lot of really awesome research to say, at what stage in the project is the right type of fidelity of visualization, and to put some actual evidence and research behind that. Because right now we're just testing it out. Like, you're seeing all this stuff kind of real time. But I really love that question, and I don't think it's answered yet. Like, I want to answer it.
There was a question about Gaussian splatting. If anyone doesn't know what that is, it's a type of creating point clouds, a way of capturing the real world in 3D in a very efficient, sort of real-time 3D renderable fashion. And I think we can take the meshes that you then convert from those clouds, but I think you've experimented with the splats, right?
Yeah, we really like Gaussian splats. I think the potential is absolutely there. It's a little bit manual and difficult right now to generate the splats, but we do support importing them into scenes. I think where at least I envision this going is that we'll need to sooner than later build some of the Gaussian splat features into these toolings to make it accessible. So the potential is absolutely there. The biggest barrier right now is the challenge of using some of these tools. But for those that aren't familiar, Gaussian splat is a new technique for photogrammetry that, especially for foliage, hair, leaves, things that are very detailed, is much superior to traditional photogrammetry with a mesh that you'll see with Google Tiles. You can see the trees kind of get goopy and splotchy.
Yeah, dreamy, like a painting kind of.
Right. So there's tons of potential there. And yes, we technically support it, but what we're seeing is that there's still some challenges of making it accessible and easy for users to leverage that.
Awesome. Well, I think it's 2:55. I'm going to call it there, and just thank everyone for coming, and those of you that shared your comments in the chat and in voice. It's so great to hear from your experiences, and hopefully we can stay connected and keep writing and sharing about this stuff. I'd love to see more academic research too, because we have questions. We see this effect where people use these tools and then they get more courageous, I think, in terms of feeling like I can change my city. And that's sort of a broader effect beyond a specific project that I think we have this theory of change, but I would like to prove it. So if anyone's researching that, like, just the people you meet who are so advanced at placemaking, the way that they just don't have any problem like moving a Jersey barrier, like getting something out of the way, like there's this sort of sense of agency that I feel like these tools could start to bring back for everyday folks. So I'll leave that with that thought, and just thank Kieran so much again for being our guest today. Definitely check out 3DStreet and check out inCitu. They both have basic tiers where you can try them out the product. So I hope that you give it a shot and let us know your feedback.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everyone.